up today our 7 Great I Am series. We have been looking at how John has been bringing the gospel to the world of Asia and Asia Minor. And there are these gods that the people of Asia and Asia Minor are familiar with, and these gods make particular kinds of claims. These gods claim to be the bread of life. They claim to be the light of the world. They claim to be the door, the good shepherd. And so we've been looking at all these. Demeter, who claimed to be the bread of life. Apollo, who said, I am the light of the world. The door was claimed by Janus. There was a god by the name of Pan, who claimed to be the good shepherd. I am the resurrection, the life, was a claim made by Asclepius, the god of healing. Last week, we looked at the way, the truth, and the life, and that would have been the goddess Athena and what she claimed to do and to bring into the world. And this week, I want to do something a little bit different, just to throw you off balance. It's what I do. I want to talk to you about the passage first, try to unpack what we can from the passage, and then I want to introduce you to this last God for this series, and then see what we can try to take away as implications as we move towards the Lord's Supper towards the end of the service. So that's the roadmap of where we like to head. I usually don't tell you ahead of time, so you're welcome. But if you guys are ready, let's go ahead and look at the passage this morning from John 15. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. Now, for the life of me, I can't figure out why we translated this take away. Some translations cut off. Some translations just different things that imply. And it's so easy to take cheap shots at translators. I said this in the first service. We do that all the time because it's so easy to stand up here and be like, I don't know why we would translate it like this. Can I just say, to remind myself this morning, people that translate the scriptures are brilliant. Brilliant. A whole committee, team of PhD. This is not stupid people like flipping translations out there at a whim. So it's so easy to take pot shots. But having said that, I'm going to take a pot shot anyway. For the life of me, I cannot figure out why we translate this take away. The Greek word here is eros. Say eros. Eros, every other time we translate it almost completely, we translate it as lift up, to bear, to carry, to lift up. And here we're like, cut off, take away. It's not what's being said here. There is going to be a part of the passage that talks about the branches being taken and thrown into a fire. So that's coming. But right here in this passage, what Jesus is teaching is if you are a branch that doesn't bear fruit, and every vine dresser will tell you this, even not just in the Middle East, but any vine, I have a friend down in Twin Falls that he's planted this vineyard in his backyard. It's gorgeous. But any vineyard owner will tell you, you don't cut off, you tie up. If you have a branch that's falling on the ground, it's not going to produce fruit. And if it does, it's going to be stunted fruit we've talked about before called be'ushim. It's going to be bad fruit. And so you have to get the branch off the ground. So I've seen it a handful of times in the Middle East. They'll take a rock, they'll take a piece of wood, and they'll prop it underneath the branch to get it to grow upwards. Or they'll tie it to the stump, or they'll tie it to the tie lines that run through the vineyard. They don't lop it off. They don't cut it off. They tie it up. They lift it up so that it has the opportunity to bear fruit. The teaching here is if you don't bear fruit, God's going to put you in a situation where you can. God's going to tie you up. Sound like fun? God's going to bear you up. God's going to put you in a place where you can bear. God is the vine dresser. Let me show you a picture just so you can have a better image of what Jesus is talking about here. When you look at the vine, it's kind of hard to see because of the shadow. But right down here towards the left, you see the stump. The Jews saw a grapevine as a tree. They called it a tree. You're like, that's stupid, it's not a tree. Well, to them it was. Olive tree, fig tree, grapevine is a tree. So that stump is the trunk. When Jesus refers to, I am the true vine, the reference there is that he's the stump or the trunk of the vine. You, as disciples, he says, are branches. You're the branches, and God is the vine dresser, which is really going to mess with your Trinitarian theology. Nevertheless, we're not going to camp there. God's the vine dresser. He's going to do what he needs to do to help you bear fruit. What is your job? Jesus is going to say, stay connected to the vine. God will help you bear fruit. Your job is to stay connected to the vine. So let's go back to the passage and look at that. again. Let's go back to that. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he lifts up. And every branch that does not bear fruit, every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes. So I got good news for you. Let's say you do bear fruit. God's going to prune you. Yay! This is such good news. So if I don't bear fruit, God ties me up, lifts me up. If I do bear fruit, he prunes me that I could bear even more fruit. Let's keep going. Already you are clean. Again, the translation here should say pruned in my opinion, but nevertheless, you are pruned because of the word that I have spoken to you. Abide or remain. That's what abide means. Remain in me. Remain in me. Abide in me. Stick to the path. And I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides and remains in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. That makes sense. If you're a vine and you're a branch on that vine and you disconnect yourself from the trunk, how well is that going to work out for you? Not very well. This is one of Jesus' most kind of no-duh teachings, but it's a really good one nonetheless. You have to stay connected to the vine. I am the vine and you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. Brent and I were talking about the ESV and its wonderful choice of he it is. Sounds like a Yoda translation of the scriptures. Bear much fruit he will. And I think I can make a lot of money off of a Yoda translation of the New Testament if I do say so myself. Anyway, back to being serious. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers. And the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, if you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified. So Jesus says, this is why we have to remain in the vine, because it glorifies God. We have to remain in the vine because it tells the world what God is like. We have to remain in the vine because when we remain in the vine, we tell the world who our God is. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. So how do I remain in the vine? Why do I tell the world who God is? Because to remain in the vine means to love other people. And when you love other people, when you obey the commandments of God, you tell the world what God is like. But listen, he's not done yet. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be full. So it's not just about telling the world what God is like. Jesus says there's something else that goes on inside of you. It's not just external, it's also internal. Because when you abide in the vine, you have real, true joy. This is similar to the abundant life we talked about a few weeks ago, when we talked about the good life and the abundant life. And we talked about you want to really truly live? You want to truly live? Like you want your life to hum with vibrancy. Love other people. Forgive. Be generous. Be hospitable. Jesus says, do you want to have real, true joy? Obey my commandments. Love others. Love others. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should remain, abide. So that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you. These things I command you, so that you will love one another. What does it look like to have abundant life? What does it look like to have true, lasting, complete, full joy? Lay your life down on behalf of other people. That's what real joy will feel like. Jesus says, I'm the creator of all of it. I know how I created you. I know how I made you to live. And if you want to really hum, like if you want to bang on all cylinders, then lay your life down for other people, because that's what I've made you to do. I've made you to love because I've made you like me. I've made you in my image. So love other people. Now, let's break from that conversation and let me introduce you to the God that we need to deal with today. The God's name is Dionysius. Say Dionysius. Yeah, and everyone, we'll talk later. Listen, there are 40 million ways to pronounce all these Greco-Roman gods, and we can pronounce them like Nudnik Americans, or we can pronounce them the right way, which is how I say it. Okay, now, I love having the pulpit. It's so much fun. There's so much power. Anyway, just totally kidding, I hope. Dionysius is the Greek god of wine and orgy. I'm going to try not to say the word orgy 40 million times this morning. I'm going to try to say sexual immorality so I don't drive everybody crazy. But that's who he was. Dionysius was a god of wine and orgy. He was a god of pleasure. He was the god... We'll talk more about Dionysius. Dionysius, the myth of Dionysius, has a lot of... I was talking to Paul as we got ready in Sermon Club this week to preach a sermon. Paul Patterson was talking about how complex the Dionysian myth is. I don't know if this would make sense to you, but Dionysius was a very popular god, god of wine and sexual immorality. He was found everywhere. There was a huge statue of Dionysius right across the Sea of Galilee, right across from the triangle. Big statue of Dionysius in Susita with his hand outstretched. Would be the same idea of just essentially flipping off the Galilee. It was Rome's way of saying, hey, up yours, Jews. It was that. Dionysius was everywhere. Dionysius was the god of pleasure. There are so many strings of the Dionysian myth, it's hard to follow what the main thread of Dionysius is. In one Roman version of the myth, Dionysius is the product of Zeus having a child with his mistress. If that's sounding like a theme, it is. His wife Hera becomes very upset. If that's sounding like a theme, it is. She immolates the mistress. And before the mistress is burned up, Zeus takes the unborn child, puts it in himself. I'm sparing you the PG-13 details. And gives birth to Dionysius on his own. That didn't get the reaction the first service gave me, but if you're thinking, that's the appropriate response, and I won't get into the nitty-gritty details, I would like to focus on the other side of the Dionysian myth, more the ancient Greek version. Went like this. Dionysius grew up on a vine in the Palouse Valley. That picture I showed you of a vine not too long ago was actually taken in the Palouse Valley right outside the ruins of Sardis. If you're ever there and you look out across the Palouse Valley, it is just vibrantly green. It's nothing but vineyards. Depending on who you talk to, some of the best wine is grown in Turkey. On one side of Turkey towards Pamukkale, on the other side of Turkey towards the Palouse Valley. It has been wine for thousands of years. And Dionysius was born on the vine and tended, and when he was born off the vine, the gods and Zeus took him and whisked him away to the top of Mount Palouse, where they entrusted Dionysius to an old couple who was without child, who would raise him from infancy to be the god that he was. Now, as the tale is told, there was a wedding down in the Palouse Valley, and something horrible happens at this wedding. They ran out of wine. And so they sent word up to Dionysius, up to the family, and said, send down Dionysius because we have run out of wine. So as the story is told, Dionysius comes down the mountain riding on a donkey. This is one of the only pictures where he decided to put on clothes before he left. It is so hard to find a picture of Dionysius wearing anything. Nevertheless, he comes down the mountain riding into the city on a donkey. He goes into the wedding and turns water into wine. Now, if you're thinking, I have heard this story before, very good. My question would be, who tells us that story? Does Matthew? No. Does Mark? No. Does Luke? No. Who tells us? John. Why? Because he's a pastor in Sardis, right outside the Palouse Valley. It makes perfect sense that John would tell us that story and the other gospel writers don't. Now, this is the myth of Dionysius. If we would, let's jump around here. Let's go to Pergamum. We've talked about Pergamum. About a year ago, we did the 7 churches of Revelation, and we have a diagram here of the Acropolis in Pergamum. Aaron talked to you about the Acropolis in Pergamum, about how it was a visual wonder. That is absolutely correct. To this day, even as a pile of rocks, the Acropolis in Pergamum is just a sight to see. The huge installation that draws your attention to this day is the theater that's built into the side of the Acropolis at Pergamum. The theater is there because every year, Pergamum is the neochorus of Dionysian worship. Neochorus, think capital city. It's the capital city of Dionysius in the Roman world. Every year, they have an annual Dionysian festival to celebrate the story of Dionysius. Now, Dionysius is the god of wine and sexual immorality, so you can imagine what that festival looks like. I'm going to focus on the wine, and I'm not going to touch on the sexual immorality part. Just please know that's going on even more prevalent than the things we're going to talk about this morning. There's one Roman ordinance that we found in Roman history that said a woman was not allowed to get married until she had lost her virginity at the Dionysian festival. This is Dionysius. It's the god of pleasure. So once a year we have this festival, and the festival begins at the theater where they tell the story and they put on the play and the drama of Dionysius. And the parade begins. If you see this temple towards the left of the diagram, that's the temple of Dionysius. The parade begins there. The god makes his appearance and begins the parade down what's called the Sacred Way. He's going to leave the Sacred Way, go down the roadway through Pergamum, where they're going to pass 22 different temples and a bunch of other installments that I'm going to look at here in just a moment. If we go to the next picture. I took this picture while I'm standing on the ruins of the Dionysian temple. What you see there, that rectangular piece, is the ancient ruins to the altar of Dionysius. When the festival would begin, they would cover this altar. It's a massive structure. They would cover this altar in raw meat. The blood would pool around the bottom of the altar. And the celebration of Dionysius always involved the consumption of raw meat and wine. Dionysius said, if you eat my flesh and drink my blood, it will put the God in you. And I want Dionysius in me because he's the God of pleasure. What kind of God do I want in me? I want the God of pleasure. Well, then eat my flesh and drink my blood. Interesting. Which gospel writer told me about Jesus saying, if you eat my flesh and drink my blood? Was it Matthew? Was it Mark? Was it Luke? Who was it? Context. Love it. Okay. The parade begins here, continues down the Sacred Way. Now, when the archaeology team at Pergamum, when they were doing the dig, they found along the Sacred Way these storefront installments. They had 3 floors, 3 different tiers to them. And they didn't know what they were when they first uncovered them. I'll show you some pictures. The first floor of these installments looked like this. Now, if you notice that you see these big barrel vats, the ruins of them. They knew when they excavated it, as they did studies on the residual stuff left in the vats, that they held wine. The problem with that was that that's not how you store wine. Those are the size of 50-gallon drums. You don't store wine like that in the ancient world. In the ancient world, you store wine in skins or special jars that you hang from the ceiling. This messes up everything about the fermentation process. So they're not storing wine like this, but those are 50-gallon drums. You don't serve wine out of a 50-gallon drum. I went out to Black Cyprus with the wife this week. They did not serve me wine out of a 50-gallon drum. Man, tough crowd this morning. Would have been great, though, wouldn't it? Just roll that puppy out and boom. Okay. They did not. The second floor, they found this. So they're confused. They don't know what they're dealing with here. Second floor, let's go to that next picture. They found these vats, these troughs, which are plumbed for drainage. What are these? What's going on here? The third floor, the third tier, made a whole lot more sense. These were easily recognizable. We can go to the next picture. The third floor, they found two tricliniums facing each other. A triclinium is a three-sided table. You recline on your left elbow on the table, and they come and they bring food, and they put it on the shelf in the center, and you can talk to everybody and socialize while you eat off the shelf with your right hand. They didn't know what they were dealing with here. What are these storefronts? Well, as they did the study, they came to some conclusions. Whether they're right or not is up for historical debate. I particularly think they're dead on. The archaeological team decided that if we were to go back to the first floor, this is where, during the Dionysian festival, all along the sacred way, you could go into any one of these storefronts and they would serve you wine. Somewhere between 1 to 2 million people showed up for the Dionysian festival. So you need 50-gallon drums if you're going to serve the public wine. You would take your wine up to the third floor, where you would eat and be served raw meat. Now, if you're sitting there going, okay, I would be getting sick. Very good. Welcome to the second floor. The second floor is what they called vomitorium. It's up for historical debate if that's what actually is supposed to be called, yada, yada, yada. Nevertheless, these were vats where you would take your wine, you would go up and eat, and then whenever you got sick, you would be able to go down, vomit into the vats. It would self-drain and plumb for yourself, and you could go back up and start all over again. Now the second service is cooking. All right. Now, every time I've taught on this, I get the same reaction from everybody. Now, here's what I always say. Usually when I go here or talk about this or do this lesson, I'm with college students. Now, this may feel like a real cheap shot when it comes to the timing of this. Nevertheless, I'm a campus minister, so I get to. I always ask my college students, does somebody want to explain to me what's so drastically different from this to what happens every Friday night on Greek Row? Now, to which they don't laugh because they get it. That we'll go out on a weekly, and I'm hoping that those of you that aren't college students are mature enough to not be like, oh, stupid college students. Right, because this doesn't find its way into your life at all. But that's my challenge to the college students. We go out every Friday night for the sole purpose of getting so plastered that I'm going to puke my brains out. Katy Perry said every Friday night. So tell me, how far removed are we from this culture? Not. We're not. We just have changed the names of the gods. But we still serve the gods of pleasure, don't we? Now, here's what's so interesting. Jesus takes a teaching about being the true vine, and he speaks to us about remaining in the vine. Because we have to remain in the vine. And if you will remain in the vine, you will have joy, and your joy will be full, and it will be complete. And we looked at the things that Jesus taught, and we said, ugh, that sounds hard. And we wrestle with a world that offers us a very different kind of joy. It's about immediate selfish gratification of my own selfish desires. And I don't care if it's wine or frat parties, and I'm not against the Greek lifestyle for all you college students thinking I'm against frats and sororities. I'm not. I'm against the idolatry of our hearts. Lots of good places to tell the story of God, and Greek Row is one of them. But there's an idolatry that wages war on our hearts, and it says, take this joy. It's just sitting right in front of you. Now I want to work through some implications, and while we start to head that way, we're going to get ready for our time of communion, and so the servers are going to head back there to do that. If you're visiting with us this morning, when they come by with the bread and the juice, we would love to invite you to join us. We have an open table, and if you believe and want to celebrate the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, we want you to do that with us today. When they pass that out, you can just take the bread and the juice and hold on to it, and we'll take it all together here in just a moment. But I want to work through some implications here as they do that. One of the implications I would say is this. There are two joys that battle for our loyalty. One is shallow, and the other is deep. And I don't even have to preach on this because we know it to be true. Like, I don't have to apologetically defend my position here because we all know this. Deep down, I don't even care who we are, believer, not believer, it doesn't even matter. We know this to be true. We know that there's a joy in our life that's that deep, don't we? We know that it doesn't fulfill. We know that we're going to be back there next Friday night because we know how we're going to feel Monday morning. We know it's that deep. It is not complete. It's not abundant. It's not full. It's that shallow. Meanwhile, Jesus speaks to us about remaining in the vine, abiding, to be a person of conviction. We were talking in the sermon club about how last week's message rolls into this week's message because it's about what are you convinced of? What are you convicted to be true? What story do you really want to trust? Because Jesus says, if you will stay convicted, you are made in the image of God. You are made in the image of a God who knows when to say enough, a God who knows you are not just an animal, you are not just a beast that has to follow every whim and every desire of every immediate self-gratification thing that comes up. You are the kind of person that can live by conviction if you choose to trust the story that God is telling. And it's a story that says that if I will stay on the path, even though it doesn't feel like Care Bears and unicorns and rainbows. Even though every time I open up my Bible, a pillar of light doesn't shine down out of the ceiling and a chorus of angels don't sing around me. Even when I just don't feel God, if I will stay on the path and remain, He will produce fruit, but you have to trust and be a person of conviction that that story brings something abundant. But meanwhile, Dionysius sits over here with a kegger and a car full of circus clowns and a DJ dropping it like it's hot. And it looks so good. Remain in the vine. Stay connected to Jesus, and you will bear fruit. It will involve pruning. It will involve being tied up. It will involve the vine dresser helping you bear fruit, but that fruit will satisfy in a way that the Dionysian festival cannot. Second implication I would say would be this. The first of these two joys focuses on self. It's why it's shallow. Because all it is about my own selfish desires. The second joy focuses on others. It's focused on laying my life down. And Jesus, the one who made you and me, says, I know how I made you, and I designed you for this, to lay your life down on behalf of others. And when you do, your heart will sing in spite of all the other circumstances that are swirling around you. Serve others. Don't serve self. You'll find abundant life. You'll find true, complete, full joy. Third implication would be this. And there's a passage in your notes. I don't have time to go over it this morning. But Jesus is going to go on in the very next verses to say, if you want to go down this path, if you want to remain in the vine, not only is it going to be pruning and tying up, but the world's not going to think it's a wise move. You're not going to find people in the world going, man, what a great decision. The world's going to be looking at you saying, come over here into this party. It's great. Come take a little bit of this pleasure. I can taste it and feel it right now. What are you doing? That looks hard. Jesus says that's what it will be. It will be hard. So I would say this. We've been confronting many of the gods of our culture. And I would say this isn't just about Dionysius. This is about Demeter, and this is about Pan, this is about Asclepius. This is about the abundant life and the good life that we talked about a few weeks ago. If we want to go about the work of confronting the gods in our culture, if we continue to wage war on the idolatry of our lives, it will not be easy. But I would argue it would be greatly worth it. Because at the other end of that journey, you will find life that is abundant, you will find joy that is full, and you will find fruit that will last. Dionysius said, "If you eat my flesh and drink my blood, it puts me in you." You can have the God of pleasure in you. And to this same world, John wrote that Jesus said, "If you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you be my disciple." Today we have the opportunity to choose which God we want to live through us. We can choose the God of pleasure, and maybe that was a choice you made even last Friday night. I have good news. This God is really, really real. And the God that can live through you when you eat this bread and drink of this cup is a God of self-sacrifice who would lay down his life on behalf of other people. You want to combat the idolatry of your life? Die to self. Greater love has no man than this, that he would lay down his life for his friends. And we remember that today. We remember that the day that Jesus was with his disciples, that Passover meal, he took a piece of bread and he broke it and he gave it to them and he said, "Take and eat. This is my body. And whenever you do this, remember me." If you're in on this covenant today, let's remember Jesus. Later that meal, Jesus took a cup of wine. He passed it to his disciples. He said, "This is the blood of the covenant. Drink from it, all of you." This is our opportunity today to choose which God we would want to live through our lives this year as we begin this fall. Jesus says, whenever you do this, remember me. If you'd like Jesus to be the one that lives through you this year, let's drink. Father God, I pray that you would help us wage war on the gods in our lives. I pray that you would help us wage war on the idolatry of our hearts. I pray you would help us wage much less war on the people around us. I pray that you would take our battle bows and you would break them, and you would smash our war chariots. I pray that we would be people that would know peace, that we would see the true King riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, prepared to lay down his life for his friends. I pray our lives would mirror that God who rode a donkey and not the other one. God, help us to be people who know peace, who know abundant life, who know full and complete joy. We pray all these things in the name of the great I am, Jesus. Amen.